600,000 Russian soldiers. That's more troops than the entire active United States Army. And somehow they are losing. Stop and think about that for a second. The second strongest military on earth, nuclear weapons, endless oil money, a population 3 times the size of Ukraine's. And in the spring of 2026, this giant is going backwards, bleeding elite units, pulling 1960s tanks out of storage, and watching its generals quietly panic behind closed doors in Moscow. So how is this even possible? How is a smaller country fighting on its own soil, dismantling the offensive plan of a global superpower? The answer is a secret strategy, one that military historians will be studying for the next 50 years. And today, I'm breaking down the 10 shocking reasons it's working. Stay until the end, because reason number 10 changes everything. The first reason Ukraine is destroying Russia's offensive plan is something 99% of news coverage never mentions. It's called the Fortress Belt, and it might be the most sophisticated defensive system built anywhere in the world since World War II. Picture this. A massive defensive spine stretching across eastern Ukraine, running from Kostiantynivka through Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. It's not just a trench line, it's not just a wall. It's an integrated, layered killing machine, wired with overlapping artillery zones, hidden minefields, underground bunkers, and a 24/7 drone surveillance grid watching every meter of approach. Ukraine spent years building this, quietly, methodically, while the world wasn't paying attention. And here's what happened when Russia's spring offensive slammed into it. Putin's generals promised him the belt would crack in weeks. Sheer manpower would do the job. Massive artillery would do the job. Wave after wave of soldiers would do the job. None of it worked. Every armored column that pushed forward got shredded. Every infantry assault got chewed up by overlapping fields of fire. Every Russian commander who tried to be clever found out that Ukrainian drone operators were already watching them, and already calling in the strike. Think of the Fortress Belt like a giant flytrap. Russia keeps walking into it, expecting to break through. Instead, the belt absorbs the punch, grinds the attackers into dust, and gives nothing back. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers thrown at this line. The total reward, roughly 350 square kilometers of dirt, about the size of a mid-sized American city, paid for with an entire Army Corps. The lesson here is brutal and beautiful at the same time. Modern defense, done right, beats modern offense every single time. And Ukraine just proved it to the world. The second reason Ukraine is winning is a mindset shift, and it's the one Russia still doesn't understand even 3 years into this war. Here's the truth. Russia wants one specific kind of fight, a meat grinder. Massive formations crashing into each other, endless artillery pounding the same square mile for weeks. Wave after wave of soldiers charging across open fields, trading bodies for inches. This is the Soviet playbook. It's the only style Russian generals have ever truly mastered. And for decades, it worked because their enemies were forced to fight on those terms. Ukraine looked at that playbook and said, absolutely not. Instead of trading bodies, Ukraine trades precision. Instead of meeting Russia head-on, Ukraine slips around the side. Instead of mass, Ukraine uses brains. The core principle is almost philosophical: collapse the enemy's ability to function before you ever ask a single soldier to take the ground. Think about it like this. 2 boxers step into the ring. One is a 300-pound brawler who only knows how to swing wild haymakers. The other is a lean, fast counterpuncher who studies footwork, exploits angles, and waits for the perfect opening. The brawler is bigger. The brawler is scarier on paper, but the brawler also gasses out by round 3, and the counterpuncher picks him apart. That's exactly what's happening on the battlefield in 2026. This style has a name in military circles: new generation asymmetric warfare. And Ukraine has become the single most effective practitioner of it on the planet. Not because they had a choice, but because they had to invent a way to beat a much bigger enemy. The lesson is universal, and it applies far beyond war. When you can't outmuscle your opponent, outthink them, force them to fight the war you're best at, not the one they're best at. That single decision is shaping the outcome of this entire conflict. The third reason Ukraine is dismantling Russia's offensive plan is something that has completely rewritten the rules of modern warfare. It's called the deep strike revolution, and it's turning the Russian rear into a graveyard. Here's what's happening. Ukraine's mid-range strike capability now reaches up to 200 kilometers behind Russian lines. 200 kilometers. That single fact has changed everything about how this war is being fought. For the entire history of modern warfare, armies have operated on one basic assumption. The rear is safe, you stockpile ammunition there, you park your fuel trucks there, you build your command posts and field hospitals there. The front line takes the punishment, but the back gets to breathe. Not anymore, not for Russia. Ammunition depots that used to sit comfortably 20 kilometers behind the line, burning massive fuel storage facilities 50 kilometers back, gone in seconds. Railway junctions in Mariupol and Crimea that used to move thousands of tons of supplies every week, no longer reliable. Bridges, command bunkers, repair workshops, electronic warfare stations, all of them targets, all of them vulnerable, all of them being hit. Now picture what this means for the average Russian soldier sitting in a trench near the front. The ammunition delivery doesn't show up, the fuel for his vehicle arrives late, or not at all. The food gets thinner, the radios stop getting replacement batteries, the artillery support he was promised never fires because the shells never made it to the battery. You cannot attack what you cannot supply. That's not opinion. That's the physics of warfare. Russia has been forced to push its logistics so far back from the front that supply convoys now take hours, sometimes days longer, to reach the soldiers who need them. And an army with broken logistics is an army that has already lost. It just hasn't admitted it yet. The fourth reason Ukraine is destroying Russia's offensive plan is the single most revolutionary weapon of the 21st century, and Ukraine has mastered it like no one else on earth. Drones. We're not talking about a few hobby quadcopters here. Ukraine is now producing and deploying thousands of sophisticated drones every single month. Reconnaissance drones watching every Russian movement. FPV strike drones tracing down individual soldiers and tanks. Long-range loitering munitions hunting fuel depots hundreds of kilometers behind the front. Naval drones sinking Russian warships in the Black Sea. And increasingly, autonomous AI-guided swarms that can coordinate attacks without a human pilot. This isn't a side project. This isn't an experiment. This has become the central nervous system of the entire Ukrainian war effort. And here's the part that should genuinely terrify the Kremlin. Russia cannot match this. Western sanctions have cut Moscow off from the microchips, optics, and precision electronics that modern drones require. So while Ukraine fields cutting-edge systems built with American and European components, Russia is scrambling with knockoff designs, outdated Iranian Shaheds, and improvised garage-built copies that perform a bold fraction as well. The cost ratio is catastrophic for Moscow. Picture this: a Ukrainian operator sitting safely in a bunker flies a $500 FPV drone into the engine block of a $3 million Russian tank. The tank explodes, the operator goes home, the drone is replaced for the price of a used iPhone. Now multiply that by thousands of times per month. Every single Russian tank that rolls forward is being watched, tracked, and frequently destroyed before it ever fires a shot. Every supply truck, every artillery piece, every command vehicle, nothing moves on the Russian side without being seen. This is what the future of warfare looks like. And Ukraine is already living in that future, while Russia is still trying to fight a 20th century war with 20th century tools. The fifth reason Ukraine is destroying Russia's offensive plan is something military analysts are now calling the rotational death spiral, and it's the clearest proof yet that Russia has lost control of its own front line. Here's how it works. Imagine you're patching holes in a leaking boat with the same piece of cloth. Every time water bursts through in one spot, you rip the cloth off another spot and slap it over the new leak. The first hole opens back up, you rip the cloth off again, and the spiral never ends. That is exactly what's happening to the Russian army right now. When one part of the front starts collapsing under Ukrainian pressure, the Russian general staff has no fresh reserves to send in. So they yank elite units from other sectors and rush them hundreds of kilometers across the front to plug the hole. That thinning creates a new vulnerability, so they pull from somewhere else, which opens another gap, and on and on and on. The most shocking example happened in early May 2026. Russia's 90th Tank Division, one of the most capable armored formations in the entire Russian military, was hastily ripped from the Oleksandrivka direction and thrown toward Pokrovsk to stop a Ukrainian breakthrough. 3,000 soldiers and 2 full tank regiments charging down exposed roads right into Ukrainian drone range. Then it happened again. The 76th Airborne Division, the pride of Russia's elite paratroopers, a legendary unit with decades of history, was shuffled endlessly between Pokrovsk and Zaporizhia. Then the 40th Marine Brigade, the elite of Russia's Pacific Fleet, was thrown into Huliopol. You don't burn your elite units plugging random holes unless you have absolutely nothing else left. That single fact tells you everything about the true condition of the Russian army in 2026. Overstretched, panicking, and quietly running out of options. The sixth reason Ukraine is dismantling Russia's offensive plan is a tactic so simple and so devastating that it borders on military genius. Ukraine has mastered the art of forcing Russia to fight two emergencies at the exact same time, and Russian command simply cannot handle it. Here's why this works so well. Modern armies are built around centralized decision-making. Generals at the top issue orders. Mid-level commanders coordinate. Frontline officers execute. The whole system depends on one thing: the ability to focus on one big problem at a time, hit it with everything you have, solve it, move on. Now imagine forcing that same system to solve two massive problems simultaneously, hundreds of kilometers apart, with no clear answer to either one. The brain freezes. The orders contradict each other. Units get pulled in two directions at once, supplies get split, commanders argue, and everything starts breaking. That's exactly what Ukraine engineered in the spring of 2026, two simultaneous drives, one pushing toward Huliopoli, one pushing toward Oleksandrivka. The Russian command structure, already stretched thin from the rotational death spiral, simply could not process both crises at once. The results were jaw-dropping. 244 square kilometers of territory liberated, between 9 and 12 settlements freed from Russian occupation. The critical Huliopol-Velika-Novosilka road rendered completely useless for Russian supply convoys, Russian positions pushed back toward Zaporizhia, parts of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast cleared. And here's why this matters more than the map alone. This is the first significant net territorial loss Russia has suffered since the Kursk operation back in August 2024. That's not a small detail. That's a complete reversal of momentum. The lesson here goes way beyond war. Whether you're playing chess, running a business, or competing in any high-pressure environment, force your opponent to defend in two directions at once. And their decision-making collapses. Ukraine just proved it on the largest battlefield in Europe. The seventh reason Ukraine is dismantling Russia's offensive plan is a shift in targeting philosophy that most people watching this war have completely missed. Ukraine isn't just destroying things. Ukraine is destroying the systems that connect those things together. Let me explain why this is so devastating. In a traditional war, you target what you can see: tanks, trucks, trenches, soldiers. You blow up the physical pieces of the enemy army one at a time, and eventually they run out. That's the old way it works, but it's slow, expensive, and bloody. Ukraine figured out something far more powerful. Instead of hitting the muscle of the Russian army, hit the brain and the nervous system. Hit the command centers where dozens of units coordinate their movements. Hit the communication relays that let frontline commanders talk to each other. Hit the electronic warfare hubs that jam Ukrainian drones. Hit the logistics nodes that schedule every supply convoy. For an entire sector, destroy one of these, and you don't just destroy a building, you isolate 20 units at once. Here's the practical reality on the ground. When Ukraine takes out a Russian logistics hub sitting 23 kilometers behind the line, the frontline units don't just lose their next ammunition shipment, they lose their coordination. They lose their eyes, they lose their ability to talk to the unit on their left and right, and suddenly 3,000 Russian soldiers become isolated little islands, blind to what's happening around them, unable to call for help, unable to even know if their flanks are still holding. And once units are isolated and blind, taking the ground from them becomes dramatically easier. This is the force multiplier that explains why Ukraine punches so far above its weight. They aren't fighting the Russian army as a whole. They're cutting the wires that hold it together and then mopping up the disconnected pieces one by one. The eighth reason Ukraine is winning is a problem Russia cannot fight its way out of because it's not happening on the battlefield. It's happening inside Russia itself, and it might be the most dangerous crisis Moscow is facing right now. Here are the numbers that should terrify the Kremlin. Russian military recruitment fell by 20% in the first quarter of 2026 compared to the year before. 1 out of every 5 recruits gone. And at the exact same moment, Russia is losing soldiers at a rate of more than 35,000 per month on the front line. Stop and think about that math for a second. You are bleeding bodies faster than ever before, and your ability to replace those bodies is shrinking at the same time. That's not a sustainable war effort. That's mathematical bankruptcy, dressed up in a military uniform. The Kremlin knows it. That's why they've resorted to increasingly desperate measures: forced conscription quotas at universities, mandatory contracts pushed through technical schools, salary bonuses so massive they sound like winning lottery tickets. But Russian families have figured out the truth. Those salaries are blood money for a son who will never come home. And here's where it gets even worse for Moscow. The Russians actually leaving, the ones avoiding registration, fleeing across borders, refusing to sign contracts, are disproportionately the young, educated, and technically skilled. Engineers, programmers, university students, the exact people modern warfare desperately needs to operate drones, run electronic warfare systems, and maintain advanced equipment. Russia is hemorrhaging its most valuable human capital at the exact moment it needs them most. The army being rebuilt to replace the losses is less trained, less educated, and less capable than the one it's replacing. So Russian military performance is declining quietly in the background, even while the brutal grinding continues. Ukraine doesn't even need to fire a shot for this collapse to keep accelerating. It's already happening on its own. The ninth reason Ukraine is destroying Russia's offensive plan is the industrial collapse quietly unfolding behind the Kremlin's walls. And once you see the numbers, you'll understand why this war has a time bomb ticking inside Russia's economy and why that bomb is already going off. Start with this single staggering figure. Russia has lost approximately 24,000 armored vehicles since the start of this war. 24,000 tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, gone. Burned out on Ukrainian fields, scattered across drone footage from Bakhmut to Avdiivka to Pokrovsk. Now here's the problem. Russian factories cannot come close to replacing those losses with modern systems. Why? Because Western sanctions have cut Moscow off from the microchips, advanced optics, thermal imaging systems, and precision electronics that every modern tank requires. Before this war, Russia quietly imported most of these components from American, German, Japanese, and South Korean suppliers. That pipeline is dead. So what is the Kremlin doing? They're doing something almost unbelievable. They're literally pulling T-62 tanks out of Soviet-era storage facilities, tanks designed in the 1960s, decades older than most of the soldiers driving them, and shipping them straight to the front line. Let me say that again, because it's that important. Russia is sending tanks from the 1960s to fight a war defined by AI-guided drones in 2026. Ukrainian drone operators don't even see these vehicles as threats anymore. They see them as target practice. A 6-year-old tank rolling across an open field has roughly the same chance of surviving a modern Ukrainian drone strike as a paper airplane has of surviving a thunderstorm. Meanwhile, on the Ukrainian side, thanks to continued access to Western technology, thousands of next-generation drones are rolling off production lines every single month. The technological gap is widening every day this war continues. Russia's going backwards in time, Ukraine is racing forward. The 10th and most important reason Ukraine is destroying Russia's offensive plan has nothing to do with tanks, drones, or trenches. It's something psychological, something far more powerful. Ukraine's strategy has stripped away the illusion of Russian strength and exposed the Kremlin's nuclear threats for what they really are, a bluff. Here's what's been happening in recent months. As the battlefield situation has gotten worse for Russia, the rhetoric coming out of Moscow has gotten louder, scarier, and more apocalyptic. State television running segments about Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missiles, officials casually dropping mentions of the Oreshnik hypersonic system, anchors describing what nuclear war would mean for European capitals, Putin himself gesturing at Belarus, opening a second front to threaten Kyiv from the north. And I want you to understand something very clearly. This is not strength. This is the exact opposite of strength. Think about it. An army that's actually winning on the ground doesn't need to threaten the end of the world. A leader confident in his conventional military doesn't need to gesture at apocalypse to get his enemies to negotiate. A country with real momentum on the battlefield doesn't demand that Ukraine completely withdraw from the entire Donbas region as a precondition for talks, especially after losing over 100,000 soldiers in 6 months trying and failing to take that exact territory by force. Putin's nuclear rhetoric is not a sign of escalation from a position of power. It is a drowning man's last attempt to convince the shore that he's actually swimming. And this is Ukraine's greatest victory of all, by systematically dismantling the Russian offensive plan on the ground. Through every single one of the 9 reasons we just discussed, Ukraine has forced the world to see the truth. The curtain has been pulled back. The myth of Russian invincibility has been shattered in real time for the entire world to watch. Once that illusion breaks, it cannot be rebuilt. And that may be the single most important shift in global power happening right now.